Now, this summer, Paris is to host the Olympic and Paralympic Games, and they are expected to draw millions of spectators here to the French capital, as well as billions who will watch the competition from home. Now, previous Olympics have been targeted by cyber attacks, and experts fear that this year could be no different. So how is the team here in Paris preparing? Our science editor, Julia Seeger, has been looking into that. She's with me on the programme now. Julia, there are concerns about this summer, as I understand it, simply because Olympics are always a target, aren't they?
That's right. Olympics are always targeted because of the media attention and the exposure that they offer, of course, because of worldwide broadcasts and transmissions. I'd like you to just imagine for a minute what would happen if the lights in a stadium went out during a competition, the type of chaos that could actually create, or, for instance, ticketing systems failing, electronic timing that would malfunction, or even the IT systems of, for instance, a anti-doping lab that weren't working. That could annul totally a competition, right? And that would be devastating. Well, those are just some of the cyber disaster scenarios that the Olympic Organizing Committee has to face. Now, we're expecting attackers to be much more active, much more aggressive in the type of attacks, of course. It's believed that the level of threat is going to be 10 times higher than usual. And hackers are going to be seeking, of course, attention, but also gain, because there's a lot of, it's very lucrative as a business. Now, there are many concerns, especially having to do with the disruption of the opening ceremony, which will happen, as you know, on the Seine River. The reason why is because all eyes will be on that opening ceremony. That's really going to give the overall tone, if you will. And of course, it's going to have much more impact than hacking any other competition. Now, if you look at the last 15 years, for instance, Olympic Games have indeed been hacked, and more. It's actually gone crescendo. If you look at Rio de Janeiro in 2016, 50 million attacks. If you look at London in 2012, 212 million attacks. 2020, and this was a COVID year, so there wasn't even any public there, 450 million. And it's expected that in the Paris Games, there's going to be 8 times as many attacks, bringing that number to 3.5 billion attacks. That's huge. And it's actually the entire IT system of the Olympic Games that will be targeted. So that includes, of course, the ticketing, the press rooms, as I said, the broadcast, but also the stadium access system. And it also includes having to secure what we call critical infrastructure. So bringing the power supply to the physical sites. Now, what's also important to understand why the number of cyber attacks is going up crescendo like that exponentially, it's because we've digitalized everything. So every time you put text somewhere, it's just another entry point for attackers.
I mean, those figures you quoted are extraordinary, Julia. 50 million attacks in Rio de Janeiro and maybe as many as 3.5 billion in this year's games. What kinds of attacks are we talking about here?
So first of all, as I said, you have different types of attackers. So you have attackers that are going to go for the financial gain. So they're going to maybe implement certain types of scams. So perhaps create false ticketing sites, for instance, or and they could also deceive people by using what we call phishing. So pushing people to click on fraudulent links or pushing people to give their banking information. That's one thing. They could also use what we call ransomware, for instance, to steal data from partner companies, but also from service providers. And think about all the different service providers: transportation, broadcasting, accommodation. And so what they do is that they blackmail them. They take all of the personal information of all these people. They blackmail them. They ask for ransom for them to then be able to retrieve the data. And then there's hacktivists. So those are members of hacker groups that are going to look for promotion and to gain media exposure, and they want to destabilize. And they could actually use a type of attack that we call denial of service, DDoS attacks, which pretty much is making a service unavailable. So you can attack a website, for instance, with lots of demands until it actually breaks down. And then the third risk, of course, is political interference. So that's an attack that's going to be supported by a foreign state. And that's what we think happened during the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in 2018, because at the time they used a program called Olympic Destroyer, and they could actually use it once again in Paris this year. People weren't able to get into the stadiums. The opening ceremony was disrupted because of that malware. And at first it was actually attributed to North Korea, but now it's believed that the Russians could have been behind it while using the modus operandi of North Koreans. So it's quite complicated, not always easy to know who's behind such an attack. But what's really important to understand here is that all of the work to secure all the cyberspace here in France, it actually started a year ago, because hackers tend to want to infiltrate way before they actually attack. So they could already be in certain companies, in the IT systems of certain companies. And so there's 10 million euros that were allocated to the national agency that's in charge of all the security of the IT systems of France, that have been auditing all of the stadiums, all of the cities that will be hosting some of the events, to make sure that there's no weak link in that chain and that people know what to do in case there's a huge cyber attack during the games.
All right, fascinating. Thank you very much indeed, Julia Seeger, our science and tech editor, for us there.